Okay, let's talk about migrating code bases and how to have a smooth transition from moving from a legacy code base to a new code base. So to start off with, let's talk about why is this hard? Why is it hard to move a code base from something you already have to a new thing where you want the features to have parity, like where you want it to be the same? To start with, we've got legacy code. So legacy code, there's many different definitions of what legacy code is, but the one I like is legacy code is any code that's in production that you do not have tests that cover it to tell you how it works. So imagine you're working on a 10-year-old code base, maybe even longer. You're going to have a whole bunch of things in there that you do not know whether they are working because they're supposed to work that way, or whether they're working that way because initially it was a bug, and actually now people are using that as a feature. So legacy code is just hard, right? Because generally there's a lot of different people that have worked on it over a long period of time with different product managers, different QA, different sales teams. So there's not necessarily that one person knows everything about that code base, how it's supposed to work and how it does work. Those two things are very different, by the way. There is supposed to work versus does work. And I like the phrase, if you want to know how something is supposed to work, ask product. If you want to know how something does work, ask QA, because sometimes they are very different things. So that's why it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to actually understand what you're trying to migrate and whether you are migrating with feature parity in mind or whether you're migrating with extra features. So let's have a look at what we want to do to prepare for migration. The first thing that you need to do is actually break this down into multiple different chunks. Big bang approaches to deploying code bases just don't work. You cannot sit in a silo with you and your engineering team and work for 6 months to a year and then release something and show it to product, QA, sales, and the clients at the same time. It just doesn't work. So the first thing to do is break down the migration into milestones. You can call these what you like, but essentially they're much smaller deliverables. So you can have a deliverable to production at a quarterly level, you can have it at a sprintly level, whatever it is, but break it down into smaller chunks. Once you've got it broken down into smaller chunks, you can get more instant feedback on it. So, more feedback on it, a faster feedback loop. So once you have worked on a particular feature, and let's call them vertical features because I think that's the easiest thing to do. So it's a vertical workflow that the clients can actually work on. So from clicking a button on a screen to the records appearing in the database and whatever other system side effects that should happen from clicking that button on the screen, right? So let's say you're going to deliver that in a sprint and you're going to show it to product and you're going to show it to QA and you're going to show it to sales and you're going to show it to engineering managers. You're going to get a faster feedback loop on whether or not what you have developed is the right thing, right? Whether you're migrating like for like, or if you're migrating with enhancements, you need constant feedback and you need to get it to production as soon as possible. So make sure that you've broken your project down into milestones. Don't have this megalithic, monolithic legacy service and say, we're going to sit in a box for a year and then at the end of that year, we'll deploy everything. Don't do that. Break it down into milestones. Next thing to make sure is you have product experts. So you need somebody who's going to make the decision for you as to whether or not you are going to deliver like for like, or whether you're going to deliver the existing legacy code plus enhancements, or whether or not you're going to replicate what used to be a bug but clients have now become to use as a feature in your new system, or if you're going to make things work as they should. So again, going back to should work versus does work, product need to take the decision whether or not we're going to re-implement this thing that technically is a bug but clients are now using, or if we're going to change that thing to work in the way that it should work. So you need product experts for that. So make sure that you have them involved early and involved often. Now, the next thing to do in preparing for a migration is testing. Testing, testing, testing. This is where a lot of people may switch off, but this is key. This is absolutely key to delivering a migration project well. You need to make sure that you have the expectation of what your new system is going to do and be able to automate that to run it time and time again, preferably nightly, maybe even more regularly than that. But you need to be able to say, when I pass this message type into my legacy service, these are the side effects it has. And for a very basic example, let's say that you have your legacy service, and let's say you have a message that comes in the top, and let's say that you have a database at the bottom, right? So you're going to transform whatever that message is into a record in that database. Now let's say you're trying to, alongside it, create your new shiny service. You also want to make sure that when that message is passed in the top of here, the same database record is made there, right? So you need to have tests. You need to have a test that tests this legacy flow, and then you need to have a test, the exact same test, that then tests the new flow and make sure that the records that you're creating are equal. Okay, so make sure that you have this integration testing framework in place before you start. And then when you're migrating, you can migrate workflow by workflow and make sure that you are creating parity as you move along. And again, if products say that you don't want parity, if you want something different, then all of a sudden this new service doesn't necessarily equal the old one, but it's probably majority of the same data, some differences. Okay, so testing framework, and I cannot stress this enough, is one of the most important things that you can have when doing a migration project, when doing code migration. So what else have we got? Okay, some miscellaneous things. Oh, change that back to white. Are you migrating to the same OS? Are you migrating a like for like on the same platform, or are you migrating to a different platform? Are you going from Unix to Linux? Are you going from Windows to Mac? Are you migrating like for like, or are you migrating because you want to run this on a new platform? That is going to be a big deal, and you're going to need to plan for that. Do you need to think about backward compatibility? So do your error messages need to be backwards compatible? Backwards compatible. Because it's all well and good if we come down here and we look at this and we've got database records in here, but if we decide to update the error messages at the same time, then potentially when you're flowing those back, your consumers may be getting a new piece of information. They may not know how to handle those error messages. So are we backwards compatible in error messages? Are we backwards compatible in logging? Do you have systems that parse your logs and use them for monitoring of performance, alarming, whatever else? If you're changing your logging, is that going to have an effect? Let's come down here and add some more bullet points. Is changing your logging going to affect systems that consume those logs and do something with that data? So backward compatibility is key here, because otherwise things could break in unknown ways. More than likely, you're going to want new logs, because if you're migrating to a new service, you want to make sure that you are appropriately logging for that service. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to have a like-for-like exact logs because it's different code base, but there may be some key events within those logs that you need to maintain. Okay, so let's look at executing the migration then. So executing the migration. Now, this shouldn't be too stressful if you've done all the planning correctly. So if you have correctly broken down your deliverables, if you have your integration and general testing framework, integration testing framework, and if you have appropriate team members, and by that I mean, oh, these spellings are probably wrong. By that I mean QA, product, and engineering, then you're probably okay, because as they say, what is it? An ounce of preparation is worth a pound of post, or in the metric, a milligram of preparation is worth a gram of post, who knows. If you are breaking down your deliverables, if you have a user story or a test case that states when the user enters the username and password, when they enter the correct username and the correct password and they click submit, they are able to log into the system and an email is sent to them, right? Let's say that is your user story. That is a broken down vertical deliverable. Now, if for that broken down vertical deliverable, you also have an integration test that says, I'm going to pass the username and password correctly to the backend service and ensure that a log is written that says the user logged in and an email is sent, okay? Now, as long as you have those two things and your product have told you that is what's supposed to happen, and your QA can test it, and your integration testing framework can also test it, what can go wrong? You have your existing guidelines about what's happening in the legacy service, you have your expectation about what's going to happen in your new service, and you have a test in place that validates that it does happen. You're breaking this down into a small deliverable that you can show to QA and product after a sprint, maybe 2 sprints, and you can push it to production after 3 sprints or 4 sprints. So you're incrementally delivering. So the executing is actually quite easy as long as the planning is done properly. As long as everything is broken down and done properly, execution is the easiest part. So what are some of the common challenges? So common challenges of code migration. Don't know why I put that all the way over there. Common challenges of code migration. Tightly coupled code. Tightly coupled code. So you've all seen it. Legacy code can be very tightly coupled. You can have database logic within the front-end code, vice versa. You can have things that are integrated that shouldn't be integrated. So one of the first things that you need to do is decouple that old code. So in some cases, you may need to actually make changes to your legacy code to do some decoupling, moving some logic into libraries, moving some database logic into the database layer, for instance. You may need to do that before you can start doing the migration. So tightly coupled code is always a problem, which is why designing your code, you should try not to couple your code. I've already mentioned this up above, but should versus does. Should versus does. So there is the code should do this. When the user clicks this button, this should happen, versus the code does this other thing. And when the user clicks this button, it does this other thing. Now, a lot of the times in systems, when they've been around for a long time, users see these side effects and these things that shouldn't be happening but do happen and then come to rely on them. So the whole should versus does, you need products to take a choice and say we are going to migrate the does and we're going to forget about the should, or vice versa, whatever they say. Code archaeology. Now this is a fun one. I'm not even going to try and spell that. But code archaeology, you're going to be digging into code that potentially no one in your current team has ever seen. Like if you're working on a very large system that's been developed over a long period of time, 10, 12, 15 years, whatever it could be, you're going to have to dig into some code that you may not have seen. It may be written in very archaic ways. It may not be done to your current standards. You're going to have to dig through it and learn what it does. And again, once you've learned what it does, you can have a look at the should versus does. You can abstract that upwards and figure out what happens or what triggers that code from the UI or from the calling code. But yeah, digging into legacy code archaeology is generally pretty hard. Let's look at some best practices then. So best practices, we've kind of covered these. Best practices, I should get better at writing. Unit tests, always have unit tests. You can actually break these out further, so you can have spec tests, unit tests, component tests, and integration tests. Now, if we go back to something I mentioned earlier, legacy code is any code in production that doesn't have tests that cover it and accurately tell you what is supposed to happen. If you're writing your new service and you're not writing it with testing, then as soon as you push it to production, that by that definition becomes legacy code. The really important thing here, or very important things for migrating code though, is you're going to be migrating for potentially a long time. You want to ensure that the changes you make today are not affected by changes you make in 6 months' time. Because if in 6 months' time you are migrating a new piece of code and that changes behavior for the code that you've written today, you want to ensure that you have test coverage that highlights the fact that you've now broken something that you already wrote. So you cannot have faith in code that you write in 6 months' time not affecting code that you write today unless you cover the code that you write today with the expectations and testing. So that is really key to software engineering in general, but in migrating projects as well. So another key thing to be able to do is to be able to track the project well. Track the project well. So strong project managers or a strong engineer in the project manager role, understanding how far through the project you are, because again, if you're migrating a large legacy code base, there is a potential that you're going to be doing this for a very long time. So you need to be able to say, what is my burn down? What have I done? What have I got left to do? What are the blockers? What are the things that have come up in the past that could come up in the future? Same with any large project. You want to be able to accurately predict the work that you're going to be able to do within a given time by the work that you have already done within a given time. So this comes down to planning, velocity, all the good stuff like that. Obviously, version control systems. That's key. Who works without version control these days? But anyway, you need to be able to roll back to previous versions of code. If you introduce something that breaks it, you want to be able to roll back, test it, roll forward, test it, and figure out what you've done. Again, general software engineering principles, but big help in code migrations as well. Okay, so I think that's roughly it. So in conclusion, code migrations are hard. They're hard because you're working with legacy code. They're hard because you're developing things that you may not have worked on before. They're hard because product may need to make choices about what you need to do with the should versus does. They're just generally quite hard. But if I can highlight anything, I will highlight the fact that planning well, planning early, and having testing frameworks in place before you start, and then delivering often and delivering fast is the key to doing this properly. Big bang approaches just don't work. There is a whole write-up about this on my blog, so I'll leave a link to that below. Sign up to my newsletter, check me out on Twitter, all the usual stuff. Okay, thanks.